The apartment was a steal, too good to pass up. For $600 a month, Adam could finally escape the shared dorms and suffocating roommates of his college life. Sure, the building was old, the wallpaper peeling in places, and the faint smell of dampness lingered in the hallways. But it was his. The landlord, a wiry older man named Mr. Grayson, had walked him through the place with little fanfare. A tiny kitchen, a narrow living room, and a small bedroom that barely fit his bed. Adam didn't care. It was cheap and close to campus. "There's one thing you need to know," Mr. Grayson said, gesturing toward a door in the corner of the living room. It was plain, painted a dull white like all the others, with a tarnished brass knob. "That door stays locked," the landlord continued. "You don't open it, you don't ask about it, and under no circumstances do you try to force it." Adam raised an eyebrow. "What's behind it?" "Storage," Mr. Grayson said curtly, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You don't need it. Do we have an agreement?" Adam hesitated but shrugged. "Yeah, sure." He figured it was probably just a closet filled with junk. Every old building had its quirks. For the first few weeks, the apartment was uneventful. Adam settled in, filling the space with thrift store furniture and a few posters. He liked the quiet. No roommates barging in, no endless chatter. But the door. The door bothered him. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a vague awareness of its presence. The way it seemed to loom in his peripheral vision when he sat on the couch. The way the air near it felt colder, heavier. One night, he swore he heard a faint tapping sound coming from the other side. He dismissed it as his imagination, telling himself it was just the old building settling, but the tapping turned into scratching. Adam started avoiding the living room, spending more time in his bedroom with the door closed, but the noises followed him, soft, muffled sounds that crept into his dreams. One night, he woke to the sound of a low, rhythmic thudding. Bang, bang, bang. It was coming from the locked door. His heart raced as he sat up in bed, straining to listen. The banging stopped, replaced by something worse, a faint, muffled scream. "Help me!" a voice whimpered, barely audible. Adam's stomach twisted. He threw the blanket off and crept into the living room, his footsteps hesitant. The door stood there, silent and unmoving. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaking. No response. The next morning, Adam confronted Mr. Grayson. "There's something in that room," he said, his frustration boiling over. "I heard banging. I heard someone screaming." Mr. Grayson's expression didn't change. He leaned on his cane, his eyes cold and flat. "I told you not to concern yourself with that door," he said. "But someone's in there," Adam protested. "You can't just ignore it." Mr. Grayson shook his head. "There's no one in that room, and if you value your safety, you'll leave it alone." Adam stared at him, incredulous. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," the landlord said slowly, "that some things are better left undisturbed." He turned and walked away, leaving Adam standing in the hallway, anger and fear churning inside him. That night, the noises returned. Bang, bang, bang. "Help me!" the voice sobbed, louder now, more desperate. Adam sat on the couch, staring at the door, his hands trembling. He couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing a flashlight and a hammer, he approached the door, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who's in there?" he shouted. "What's going on?" The voice didn't answer. Adam gritted his teeth and swung the hammer at the doorknob, the metal clanging against the brass. It took several tries, but eventually the lock gave way with a loud crack. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. It was small and windowless, the walls bare and covered in dust. The air inside was icy, sending chills down Adam's spine. But there was no furniture, no belongings, no sign that anyone had ever been in there, except for the floor. In the center of the room, the wooden floorboards were scratched and splintered, as if someone, or something, had clawed at them from below. Adam's flashlight flickered, the beam dimming. He stepped backward, his breath shallow. The door slammed shut on its own, rattling the walls. Panicked, Adam tried to open it again, but the knob wouldn't budge. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the air seemed to swallow his voice. And then he heard it. "Why didn't you listen?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, deep and guttural. The scratching returned, louder now, coming from beneath the floorboards. Adam stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. The flashlight slipped from his hands and rolled across the room, its beam landing on a crack in the floor. Through the crack, he saw something move, something pale and thin, with long, spindly fingers clawing at the wood. The last thing he heard was the sound of the floorboards splintering. The next day, Mr. Grayson stood in the empty apartment, staring at the locked door. He sighed, shaking his head. "Some people never listen," he muttered, closing the door to 2A for the last time. Adam's belongings were removed. His name was never spoken again, and the next tenant was warned, as always, to never open the locked door. The end. Let me know your thoughts.